All right, let's be honest. When we think of the Romans, we tend to picture those classic images. You know, the legions marching in perfect formation, the senators draped in those pristine white togas. But today we're going to peel back that well-polished historical facade and dive into some seriously unbelievable stuff about the Roman Empire.
Yeah, get ready for a wild ride because we're going deep into the underbelly of Roman society, a side they definitely didn't cover in your high school history class.
Exactly. We're talking about stuff that's shocking, bizarre, and even a little bit stomach-churning, all thanks to a fascinating piece we found from the Infographics Show titled Unbelievable Stuff They Didn't Teach You About the Roman Empire.
This is going to be fun. So buckle up because we're about to unearth those hidden, sometimes unsettling realities of everyday life in ancient Rome. It's going to flip your understanding of this civilization on its head.
So are you ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about the Romans?
Absolutely. Let's dive right in.
Okay, let's kick things off with something we all do. Laundry. Now, you probably just grab a bottle of detergent off the shelf without a second thought, right?
Right.
Well, in ancient Rome, things were drastically different. Their go-to cleaning agent was, and get ready for this, urine. Yeah, you heard that right, urine.
No Tide Pods for them.
Not even close. So tell me, how did this whole urine laundry thing work? And more importantly, what did it reveal about their world?
Well, public urinals were everywhere in Roman cities, and the contents, those weren't just, discarded. Urine was a hot commodity in the Roman laundry scene.
A hot commodity. Seriously.
Seriously, this speaks volumes about how resourceful they were, but also the limitations they face. They made the most of what they had, even if, to us, it seems pretty repulsive.
Okay, so walk me through the process. How exactly did they use urine to clean their clothes?
It all boils down to ammonia. Urine contains ammonia, which acts as a natural detergent, breaking down those pesky fats and grease stains. So they'd collect the urine from those public urinals, sometimes huge amounts of it, then dilute it with water and pour it all over the dirty clothes.
I'm already cringing a little bit.
It gets worse. Or, perhaps less glamorous, then came the really fun part. People, often slaves, would stand in these big tubs and literally stomp on the clothes, working that ammonia-rich liquid through the fabric.
Talk about a tough job.
Yeah, not exactly a coveted position. It's a vivid illustration of how necessity can lead to innovation, even if those innovations seem, well, a little crude to us now. But it also highlights the harsh realities of Roman society, particularly for those at the bottom of the social ladder.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on from fragrant laundry to something a bit darker. We all know Emperor Nero was, well, let's just say a bit eccentric. But the article uncovers a truly disturbing episode involving a young boy named Sporus.
Oh yeah, this one's really interesting and deeply unsettling. You see, after his wife, Poppaea Sabina, died, Nero became fixated on a young boy, Sporus, who supposedly looked a lot like her.
Okay, this is where it gets a bit creepy.
That's putting it mildly. Nero, in an act that completely defied Roman social and gender norms, had Sporus castrated, dressed him in women's clothing, and then, get this, publicly married him. He even referred to Sporus as his wife.
Wow. Just wow. I mean, was this just pure madness on Nero's part, or was there something more to it?
Well, Nero's instability is undeniable, right? But this act was more than just a whim. It was a blatant display of power, a deliberate thumbing of his nose at Roman traditions. He basically wanted to rewrite the rules of society to suit his own desires.
That's chilling. A stark reminder that absolute power can lead to the most extreme and, frankly, bizarre behavior.
Absolutely. It also shows how one person with enough power could try to upend the very fabric of their society.
Okay, moving on from unconventional marriages to some, shall we say, interesting dietary choices. Apparently, Nero and even Roman charioteers were known to drink dung mixed with vinegar.
Yeah, you read that right, dung and vinegar.
I had to reread that part a few times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. What on earth possessed them to do that?
The belief was that this concoction, usually goat or pig dung mixed with vinegar, would somehow boost stamina and help heal bruises and injuries.
It sounds more like a recipe for disaster, if you ask me.
You're not wrong. This practice highlights how Roman medicine often relied more on superstition and folk remedies than actual scientific observation.
Okay, so what was the logic behind this? Because it just sounds so incredibly unsanitary.
Well, it likely stemmed from the observation that certain animals would eat things that seemed to give them strength or vitality, and they figured, hey, if it works for them, maybe it'll work for us, even if it means drinking something as disgusting as dung.
And the vinegar.
My guess is they added the vinegar to, well, try to mask the taste, or maybe they thought it had some purifying effect, but ultimately it was a misguided and probably harmful practice.
A testament to how far people would go in search of cures and performance enhancement, even if it meant turning to some pretty questionable remedies.
Exactly. And it shows the limits of their scientific understanding at the time. They were grasping at straws, really.
Okay, let's move on from ingesting animal waste to something even more macabre. The article talks about the Roman belief in the medicinal properties of gladiator blood.
Ah, yes, gladiator blood. This is a really fascinating, albeit disturbing, aspect of Roman culture. You see, there was this widespread belief, especially among those suffering from epilepsy, that the blood of gladiators who died in the arena held some kind of potent life force that could cure them.
Gladiators, epilepsy, blood. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. Think about it. Gladiators were seen as the epitome of strength, courage, vitality. They died these dramatic public deaths in the arena. So it's not surprising that some people believed their blood retained some of that power, even in death.
So how did this belief actually play out? Did people just like rush into the arena and collect blood?
You're not far off. According to the article, people would actually rush forward after a gladiator's death to collect their blood. Some even harvested sweat and organs, like the liver, all in this desperate hope of finding a cure or some kind of medicinal benefit.
Wow, that paints a pretty grim picture of the desperation for effective treatments back then. And the power of superstition, even in a society as advanced as Rome.
Absolutely. It shows how deeply intertwined violence was with their culture and how they believed that even something as visceral as blood could transfer strength and vitality.
Okay, let's try to pivot to something a bit less gruesome, though still pretty unusual. We all know the Roman elite enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, but their dining habits apparently included some very exotic ingredients.
Yeah, we're talking way beyond your typical Roman feast here. While they certainly appreciated good wine and well-prepared food, their definition of a delicacy sometimes went in some pretty strange directions.
Like what? Give me an example.
For instance, flamingo tongues were considered a real delicacy, a sign of extreme wealth and status. I mean, just imagine the logistics of getting enough flamingo tongues for a banquet. It speaks to the resources and the lengths the elite would go to for extravagance.
Flamingo tongues? Okay, that's one I haven't heard before.
And then there were dormice, small rodents that they would fatten up in special jars and serve as a savory dish.
Fattened dormice, right. You know, I think I'll stick with my pizza and fries.
Probably a wise choice. And then, of course, there's the legendary Shield of Minerva, a dish created for Emperor Vitellius. It's something straight out of a fever dream.
The Shield of Minerva, tell me more.
This was an enormous platter piled high with an absolutely mind-boggling array of ingredients. Fish milt, which is basically fish semen, was one of the key components.
Fish semen, seriously.
Seriously. Along with other obscure and, I'm guessing, equally strange animal parts, it was this over-the-top display of opulence and imperial gluttony designed to shock and awe anyone who saw it.
So from exotic foods to phallic symbols as good luck charms. Now that's a transition I didn't see coming. The article mentions these fascinating. What were those all about?
Yeah, the Romans were big believers in the power of these phallic symbols called fascinum to ward off evil and bring good fortune. They weren't necessarily meant to be sexual in the way we might interpret them today. They were more like emblems of life, fertility, and protection.
So these weren't just like hidden away in some secret shrine.
Nope. They were everywhere. People wore them as jewelry, especially children, for protection. They adorned chariots, maybe to ensure victory in races. You could even find them on wind chimes, the idea being that the swinging fastum would actively deflect bad luck.
Interesting. It's amazing how a civilization known for its sophistication could also be so superstitious. Speaking of power structures, let's talk about the authority of the paterfamilias, the head honcho of the Roman household. It sounds like his power was pretty much absolute.
Oh, it was. The paterfamilias, literally father of the family, had immense legal and social control over everyone in his household, his wife, his children, even his slaves. This went way beyond just making everyday decisions, though.
How so? The article mentioned something pretty extreme.
It did. Here's the chilling part. The paterfamilias had the legal right to execute his own children or sell them into slavery.
Execute or sell his own children. Wow, that's just wow.
Yeah. While those extreme measures might not have been common, the fact that they were legally sanctioned highlights how patriarchal and hierarchical Roman society was. The paterfamilias' power within his family was practically unlimited.
Definitely a different world back then. Okay, let's shift gear to the early days of Christianity in Rome. The article talks about the suspicion and fear surrounding this new religion.
Yeah, the early Christians were viewed with a lot of suspicion. Their secretive gatherings, their unfamiliar rituals, it all led to some pretty wild misinterpretations. For instance, the practice of communion, where they symbolically consume the body and blood of Christ, was often seen as literal cannibalism by outsiders.
Talk about a misunderstanding.
Right. and their close-knit communities where they emphasized love and brotherhood. Some Romans twisted that into accusations of incest.
It seems like fear of the unknown often leads to the worst kinds of assumptions.
Exactly, and things took a really dark turn with the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD.
Yeah, that was a turning point, wasn't it?
It was. Nero, facing accusations of starting the fire himself, needed a scapegoat. So he chose the Christians, this relatively new and misunderstood group, and that led to a wave of brutal persecution.
A terrible chapter in history, and a stark reminder of how quickly fear and misinformation can lead to violence and scapegoating.
Absolutely. It's a lesson that unfortunately still resonates today.
Okay, let's move on to something we all use every day. Toilets. Apparently, Roman public toilets were a hell different beast, full of potential hazards.
Oh, yeah. They were feats of engineering in some ways, but far from the hygienic havens we're used to.
Paint me a picture. What was it like using a Roman public toilet?
Picture a row of holes in a stone bench, often with little to no privacy. Underneath, flowing water carrying away the waste. But the smell. That was just the beginning.
Oh, I bet. What other surprises awaited unsuspecting Romans?
Rats and vermin were common, and sometimes the buildup of flammable gases from all that decaying waste would actually cause explosions.
Exploding toilets. That's not something you see in those Roman epic movies.
Nope. And then there was the infamous tersorium, which was basically a communal sponge on a stick that everyone used to clean themselves. Talk about unsanitary.
Communal sponges. That's an image I can't unsee. I'm definitely grateful for modern plumbing.
Me too. So let's move on to Roman medicine, which, like a lot of things we've discussed today, was a fascinating mix of advanced ideas and some pretty out there beliefs.
Yeah, what was their healthcare system like?
Well, the Romans made progress in areas like surgery, and they understood the importance of sanitation, at least when it came to things like aqueducts and public baths. But formal medical training, as we know it, was pretty much non-existent.
So how did doctors learn their trade?
Often, they learned by studying animal anatomy. Human cadavers weren't readily available for dissection.
That makes sense. But the article mentioned something about dream interpretation as a diagnostic tool.
Oh yeah, that was a thing. They believed dreams could reveal imbalances in the body. For example, dreaming of snow supposedly indicated an excess of phlegm.
Dreaming of snow equals phlegm? Interesting.
Their whole understanding of physiology was based on this ancient Greek theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They thought these humors needed to be in balance for good health.
And if they weren't in balance?
Then they would try to restore that balance through things like bloodletting, dietary changes, and herbal remedies.
Sounds like a mixed bag of effective and not so effective treatments.
Definitely. Okay, let's wrap things up with one last emperor known for his, well, let's call it unique personality, Caligula. The article paints him as a truly eccentric ruler.
Caligula. Yeah, I've heard some pretty wild stories about him.
You and everyone else, like the one about him feeding his horse, Incitatus, at his dinner table. It's a classic example of his complete disregard for tradition and social norms.
A horse at the dinner table. That's just strange.
Yeah, but his delusions of grandeur went way beyond that. He actually tried to make himself a god.
Seriously?
Totally serious. He expanded his palace to include temples dedicated to himself and demanded that senators and other important people worship him as a living deity.
That's quite a power trip.
It was. And he also famously declared war on the sea, ordering his soldiers to throw spears into the water.
War on the sea. That's a new one.
It was a bizarre act, often seen as a sign that he was totally detached from reality. And, as you might expect, his reign ended violently when he was assassinated.
Another cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. Finally, the article brings up something I found really surprising. Air pollution in ancient Rome. I always associate that with modern industry.
It's a common misconception. While the scale and sources were different, ancient Rome did have significant air pollution problems.
What were the main culprits?
Lead smelting was a big one. They used lead for pipes and all sorts of things, and the smelting process released a lot of lead into the air.
And what about their agricultural practices? Did those contribute to the problem?
Definitely. They practiced large-scale burning of vegetation to clear land for agriculture, which added a lot of smoke and particulate matter to the atmosphere.
It's amazing to think that the Romans, despite their limited technology, had such a significant impact on their environment.
Yeah, and there's actually evidence of this in ice cores from Greenland. Scientists have found surprisingly high levels of lead dating back to the Roman era, comparable to levels during the early Industrial Revolution.
Wow. So, looking back at all these unbelievable aspects of Roman life, what's the main takeaway for you?
It's the contrast, isn't it? The Romans achieved so much. They were innovative and sophisticated in many ways. But alongside those achievements, there is this undercurrent of brutality, superstition, and just plain weirdness.
It's a good reminder that history and human nature itself is full of contradictions.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder what things that we consider normal today will seem unbelievable or even barbaric to future generations.
That's a great question to ponder. Well, that brings our deep dive into the unbelievable Roman Empire to a close. Hopefully, you've learned some things that will make you see the Romans in a whole new light.
I think it's safe to say we've shattered a few illusions today.
We definitely have. So until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the fascinating and sometimes unbelievable world of history.
And don't forget to wash your togas with detergent, not urine.
Absolutely. See you next time.